Hiya, this is the Cat's Library and I'll be your librarian today. In this week's video, I'm going to be continuing the original story that I've been telling on this channel. Because this video is getting so long, I'm just going to assume that you know who these people are. But if you don't, go watch the previous videos in the series. Enjoy. Earlier that day, Alani got through the main door of the Empirical building with no problem. The secretary was distracted by Mike and Dahlia, strangely enough. Alani turned into what many assumed to be a supply closet, but was in actuality a dimly lit stairway into the basement. The walls were damp to the touch, and the sound of water droplets repetitively pounding against the floor filled the space. Each step was sized for a sea dragon, so the half-human woman had to activate her aether powers to reverse her gravity so that she could leap down without injuring herself. She passed an underground level of blue hallways with an intricate wave pattern with only a curious glance. The lowest level at the bottom of the passageway was the entrance from the old castle. There were 2 guards stationed in front of the familiar double doors. The younger of the 2 guards aimed his weapon at the presumed intruder. "I'm gonna need to see a form of identification and a work order to be down here if you'd be so kind, ma'am," he commanded. Before Alani could say anything, the other sentry beat her to it. "Dude, don't you know who that is? It's Lady Alani." "Who?" The older guard gently yet playfully pushed the barrel of her co-worker's gun toward the ground. "Go ahead, your ladyship." She gave a tense professional smile at the half-human, which Alani returned. The younger guard offendedly pulled the gun out of his co-worker's applied pressure. "I too permit for you to go on ahead." Alani nodded at him and entered into the main castle. The floor opened up into a grand swimming pool, but there were walkways that half-humans and other non-aquatic personnel could use. The paths were partially submerged from the lack of maintenance, but still functional. Alani marched ahead down the passageways until she reached a black and navy back room, with an actual floor and walls covered in curtains. A bronze electrical panel was installed in the wall. Alani entered some calculations that had remained indented into her mind for a very long time, flipped the switch, and a portal waterfall was activated. She closed her eyes before the memories could flood into her and stop her from doing what needed doing. She took a deep breath and charged through to the abandoned small town in the aether. Alani opened her eyes again and almost immediately felt herself begin to cry, but forced herself to remain composed. The gleaming light from the stars catching in the darkened windows of the apartment buildings brought her back to a time when her problems were smaller and she was happier. Dazed, Alani wandered to the fountain in the town square and sat on the edge. The space grass sprouted overgrown through the cobblestones, and each stone and blade wobbled in the aether, stable and unstable all at once. The fountain still ran clean water. He cared about it more than the grass, it seemed. She ran her hand through the white mist, which was cold enough that it stung her skin with 1,000 needles. This is where he'd kissed her for the first time, where he had told her that he loved her, and where he brought her back from the dead. So many memories here. The sundial tower threw the plaza into shadow, abnormally quickly if one was accustomed to planetary time, but fairly common in the aether. The electric and aether-powered lights of the buildings glowed to life. All around her, ghosts rose out of the cobblestones, from the cracks between the door frames and windows of the buildings. They were mostly transparent and wandered around with sadly bored expressions and gazes which locked ahead steadfastly at nothing. They floated and started going about their days as if they were still alive, going to work, and gossiping with friends. A group of children even began a game of soccer. They all spoke their distorted gibberish in the most unenthused drawl imaginable. Their dry lips rasped over their equally dry bone of their teeth with each spoken word. Alani pulled her knees up to the rim of the fountain and lightly clutched them. Unnaturally prolonged life had to come from somewhere. Kepler's effort to bring her back had left them drained. Around the corner sauntered a handsome man. He was mostly on the same plane of existence as Alani, which was evident by the grass between the cobblestones bending under his weight. His posture and way of walking was upright and confident, but he leaned into each step in a way that sort of looked like he could fall over at any minute. He had cut his own white hair fairly choppily, and it fell limp and slightly greasy over one of his dark eyes. The man's chin was covered in the straggly beginnings of a beard. His finely embroidered robe was clean, and yet the color was faded. It hung in disarray from his shoulders. One sleeve was rolled up while the other hung past his bony wrist. The children kicked a ball in his direction and he smiled and pretended to kick it back at them even though his foot went straight through the material. The people couldn't see him, but he still acted as if they could. Like most things with Kepler, Alani wasn't sure if this was endearing or creepy, especially since he was the one who had sent them onto the parallel plane of existence in the first place. Her hair wrapped around her legs like the tail of an anxious cat. Even just pretending to play the game, Kepler got tired before any of his younger teammates and stood with his head thrown back, gasping for breath. Eventually, he got the sense that he was being watched and slowly turned around. Alani gave him a tentative half-smile that even she wasn't sure whether it was genuine. Kepler's face devolved into an unabashed, joyous grin, and Alani's own smile became real and beaming against her will. They stayed like that for a few seconds as any past lights vanished like the pulse of a distant star. He sprinted toward her and wrapped his arms around her, and she clutched him back as if one or both of them would float into space if she didn't. Even then, neither of them felt the warmth of the exchange, only resistance as they pressed against each other. It could have been a sobering realization that they weren't really together. Alani didn't trust him not to escape since their frequencies would interact with the portal differently and he physically couldn't escape. "Oh, Allie, I missed you," he whispered. "Yeah, I missed you too," she whispered back, and then kissed him. He kissed her back and put his head on her shoulder. She could feel him crying. "Hey, it's all right, I'm here now," Alani said. She felt a stab of guilt about leaving him alone here for so long, only to slowly remember why, and her body went cold and rigid. "I'm sorry." Kepler sat next to her and wiped his eyes. "I haven't talked to anyone but that sniveling lizard king for the last few years." "Kepler, what have you done?" "You want some tea for this conversation? I have some aether root. It's your favorite, if I remember correctly." "Why did you help the Sea Dragon Emperor take over the planet?" Kepler paused and thought for a moment before answering, which was a rarity for him. "It was something to do. They're just dragons after all, and I thought it was the best chance of seeing you again." He gave a slightly sad and 100% charming smile. Many women melted at that smile. It took everything in Alani to keep herself from going back to his place for tea and then staying there forever. Kepler's expression fell. "You're not going to stay, are you?" "Kep, people are getting hurt over this, mostly emotionally, but physically too." He sighed and looked down at his hand, which was gently caressing hers. The Emperor's scared of your friends, like really scared. He thinks that they've corrupted the populace. He's also Nash's kid." "Like Nash? "Like Nash. He was hypocritically married to a sea dragon, and Junior was on planet when this," he spun his fingers, pointing to the buildings, people, and everything, "when all this went down. He seems to have inherited his father's temperament." Oh man, Kepler, I need to leave." She brushed him off and stood up. He stayed looking at the rim of the fountain where their hands had been touching. "Will you come back?" She stopped for a moment but couldn't decide on any one answer. "Alani?" She marched at the exit without looking back, and he didn't follow her. Elsewhere, Zell growled to herself. The green footprints on the ground all that confirmed that the sea folk librarian had been telling the truth about the die. In Zell's defense, she hadn't slept since she'd gotten the assignment to track down the Earthlings. However, they all seemed to be just a few steps ahead of her, which begged the question, what sort of questions was the Glassman asking? If the Star Searcher intelligence was correct, Glassmen were mostly all-knowing. Were the humans on the side of the Empire? Zell wandered out into the rainy alleyway, where the slowly dissolving footprints led her, and casually ducked between a trash incinerator and the wall. A sickening odor filled her skull as she took in the sight of her targets through slightly watering eyes. Lady Alani was notably absent. Zell watched as Ari and Saffron met up with the rest of their crew, and Mike brainwashed the forest people into abandoning their orders to go on a busy work quest. Zell shuddered to herself. Aether weapons were just as creepy as she thought they'd be. The forest man pulled his co-worker back toward the library, and the humans, and Mary Angela, headed off further into the city. As each of the two parties disappeared from view, Zell began to slowly stretch her neck as she tried to decide who to follow. This decision was made for her when the two forest folk snuck back into the alleyway. Tayo flew into the air and Zell clung even tighter to the shadows. She held her breath. Her claws twitched on the damp concrete as if they wanted to attack the stupid traitors. Her targets met on the ground and whispered to each other for a moment before heading to the direction of the capital. The bog woman followed after them through the winding streets. Luckily, they all passed by Koozies on the way there, and Zell took the opportunity to take the tarp off one of the crates of sewing supplies and hand a coin to the shopkeeper in one smooth motion. The tarp was really a society cloak, which she flung over her shoulders to better tail the soldiers. Everyone in Seafolk City wanted to be part of a secret society, so many strangers nodded at her as she walked the sidewalks. They had no idea what her cause was. She confirmed that the forest folk were indeed going to the Capitol building, which they were, before ducking into the doorway of a closed sushi shop and pulling her tablet out of a pouch inside her shell. Since dragons didn't have fingertips, the back of the tablet had a complicated series of levers, buttons, and keyboard keys, which were more accessible for claws and talons. She ran a debugging software and then opened the surveillance app. Multiple live camera feeds showed up simultaneously. There were less than she had been briefed about, but at least she had one stroke of luck this week since her targets were giving the report in a monitored room. There were no audio devices. She muttered a curse to herself. Forest men were nigh impossible to lip read because of the fur, but from the general gist, they were in possession of one of the new translation devices and had now pieced together that they were being sent on a wild goose chase. They couldn't disobey Mike's orders because getting everyone arrested counted as finding a place to sleep for the night. Apparently. Raffi turned away from the camera as he gave more information, which the Seafolk commander helpfully repeated as if for Zell specifically. The humans were actually in the Star Searcher base. Zell was taken aback by this information. She shook herself out of it and frantically tried to text Anton to evacuate everyone, but it was too late. He was already messaging her to get out of the city. She repositioned the camera app to see the storage closet and the statue's tail, and had to put her hand over her eyes in exasperation. The Seafolk's Royal Guard were already raiding the base. Anton started a message to someone about the dam, but had to smash his tablet before he was tackled to the ground. It was all the humans could do to avoid getting crushed in the chaos. Ari tried to fight back anyway, which ended up with a guard pinning him to the ground with one talon. The other Earthlings were also arrested, and then taken away. Zell took a deep breath, turned off her device, and put it back in her shell. There was a mirror on the other side of the door frame, and she saw a royal guard leaned against a light post, reading a manual, and trying to keep an eye on her as discreetly as possible. She growled, but smiled at the same time, with each needle-sharp tooth visible. The guard shifted his weight uncomfortably. Even he knew that he couldn't win this one battle alone. After they had been arrested, Mike, Ari, Harper, and the Star Searcher men had each been lowered down into a dragon-made cave of a prison cell on a floated dolly or hoverboard. If they tried to grab it as it was returning up, the elevator administered a mild electric shock. Even if any of the dragons present had wings, they still couldn't fly out since the mechanized concrete platform had been mostly closed from about halfway down. It was almost the size of a human or a swamp dragon for now, but was on track to be completely shut by the time the tide came in. Immediately after the guard closed the door, Ari ignored the black eye and slight limp and began evaluating the new environment. He got his hand stuck in the fissure where the tide was going to come in for a second before wrenching it free. No escape that way. Okay, Mike, what's the plan? Mike had his head tilted back and hadn't stopped staring forlornly at the door since it had first been slammed shut behind them. It might have been his imagination, but it seemed to be growing further away each time he blinked, so he tried not to. Try to plug the hole and climb out, I guess. The green veins were starting to ache for losing his baseball bat for the second time in 2 weeks. He rubbed his arm. It usually took a little bit longer for the actual pain to set in. Ari, I have a headache. Could you lead the escape for a bit? Ari felt suddenly cold. He paused for a moment, half expecting his best friend to change his mind. Mike stayed still. Ari clenched his fists and took a deep breath. Right? He turned to Anton, Harper, and the other 2 star searchers. You heard him. Plug the hole. Anton translated for the other 2 sea dragons. The voice modifiers that they had used were actually devices which took the electrical signals in their brain and translated them into other languages. Anton was the only one there, besides Harper, who actually spoke English. Ari took off his backpack, which had been heavily searched by the guards, and held out his hand so that Mike could hand over his own. For the first time since they had got there, Mike took his gaze off of the one way out to appreciate his friend's optimism. He twitched his mouth up in a smile even though his eyes remained grim. He gave Ari the bag. The dragons shoved their cloaks into the fissure, and Ari and Mike took everything out of the packs to fill the space. It was a long and thin crack in the wall, so they barely filled it. Okay, Ari shoved the last piece of spare clothes and brushed off his hands theatrically. Which one of you sea dragons is the strongest? Ari tried a few different configurations before getting Anton standing at the bottom, the weakest sea dragon standing on 2 legs, Mike standing on his shoulders, and Ari at the very top. I think there was a Dr. Seuss book like this. It didn't end well, Mike said. Doctor who? Ari asked. Completely different person, Mike clarified. We'll finish this conversation later, Ari decided. Anton had insisted that 1 sea dragon stay on the ground to catch them if they fell. Harper pressed the cloak farther into the fissure at a weak point. His bad leg meant that he couldn't lift anyone, but he still wanted to help. The water was already up to his chest. Ari at the top still couldn't reach the platform, so he jumped as high as he could. Mike! Mike! Ari whisper-shouted. Ari was somehow hanging onto the concrete shelf from his fingertips, and with his legs subtly pedaling in the open air. Good job, Ari! Mike responded. Just pull yourself up. Okay. Mike called down for Harper to try climbing the tower. Ari took a deep breath and gripped the stone until his knuckles turned white. He tried to swing his upper body up but couldn't do it. Next, he tried to pull himself up instead of push, which was mildly more successful, but much slower. He finally got his right elbow firmly on the ledge, but was shaking from the exertion by this point. The only thing getting him through was the thought of Dahlia possibly in the same situation. Ari shifted all of his weight onto his elbow, but slipped off into the air, taking off a fair bit of skin in the process. At the same moment, the tower collapsed, and everyone began falling. Before any of them could crash to the ground, a graceful flash of blue and silver darted at Ari from above. It grabbed him by the shirt, and his field of gravity shifted to be similar to being underwater or in space. He was pulled up so that he landed on the ledge. Each of the others had a similar fate where their descent was slowed by whatever force was saving them. The blur did flip in the air before landing gracefully next to Mike and staying still long enough to reveal itself as Alani. Hey guys, what did I miss? She asked. Nothing much, Mike snarked. We're all about to die, but what else is new? The real question is, what were you doing all afternoon? You weren't there for our meeting with the society people or for our arrest, which is objectively suspicious. Alani looked at him blankly for a moment. I went through a portal to the Aether Kingdom to see my boyfriend Kepler. You seem to be waterlogged. I'm going to try to reverse the slabs and bring the elevator down. She leapt up into the air to get out the door, but Ari grabbed her by the arm as she flipped by his platform. No, you're not going to do that. You're going to get Dahlia and Saffron and the dragon women to safety first. Do you understand? Yeah, I'll make sure your wife is safe, no problem. Wait! Anton called up. The Emperor is about to flood the city. You should deal with that before anything. Yeah, I know, I'm working on it. We have an hour. She peeled Ari's fingers off her arm and virtually vanished in a flash of blue light. Now it was Ori who was staring at the door, and Mike who was looking around the room. Anton, it looks like one of the stoppers have come loose. Maybe some pressure would help? Mike suggested. The dragon nodded and signaled the others to follow him. They pressed their bodies against the wall. Ori, do you think you could climb out? No, I mean, there's some handfolds in this section, so I should be able to. Just do your best, bud. Mike then turned back to the dragons. Hey, Anton, what was it you were saying about flooding? Well, I'm the head operator at the dam, so I know His Imperial Highness has all the codes to the controls. Some weird readings were coming from it when you guys came here, and the Emperor left shortly after, despite publicly announcing that he was going to grant you an audience. Logically, he is planning something, and flooding appeared the most likely. Guys, Ori called down. I'm really trying to concentrate here. If I fall down from here, I'm gonna land on the platform and break something. So I don't want to hear about how the city's gonna go through a genocide until I'm on stable ground again. Groovy? Mike cleared his throat self-consciously. Yep, it's groovy. Sorry, bud. Ori was struggling significantly less now that he had his weight evenly distributed, but the handholds were still fairly complicated for a beginner to figure out. Mike was nearly completely submerged in water. Above, Ori nearly fell a few times, and he tried not to let Mike know how badly his fingers were getting torn up by the stone. The possibly sprained knee Ori was fine with. It was just little things that seemed to bother him more for some reason. The concrete platform retreated back into the walls, so Alani or someone else must have done something. Ori finally managed to claw his hands into the door frame and was met by a pair of sandaled feet. Alani smiled down at him. Good progress, guys! I asked you to get Dahlia, Ori hissed and batted away her hand so that he could pull himself up onto solid ground unassisted. No, we need to either evacuate the city or find a way to stop the dam break order. Like there's an actual dam out there. You know what I mean, Mike snapped up. She's on track to drown before the city does, so it only makes logical sense, Michael, Ori answered. Alani rolled her eyes, deactivated the shocker on the hoverboard, and tossed it down. Okay, guys, heavies first. She turned to Ori. We're meeting the girls in the break room down the hall. Mike came up on the hoverboard with Anton. They stepped off and sent it down for the others. We tried contacting the other people with access to dam codes, but they've all been paid off, and communication outside the city has become sketchy since the force field went up. There's a chance that we'll complete the evacuation, but I can't see any other options. Here's the plan. At the same time that the boys were stuck in the cell, the girls were indeed dropped into an identical one. What the humans hadn't been aware of was that the only sea dragon who spoke their language was Anton, who was conveniently missing. When Dahlia and the glassman reached the ground, the red feathered dragon instantly began pacing, gesturing, and lecturing in what started to devolve into a full-on panicked rant. The soft-spoken sea dragon who had told the backstory in the last episode occasionally would say "Kuzi" to her fellow conspirator when the mountain dragon got too worked up, but the sea dragon would say the name so dejectedly that it didn't so much as put a dent in the verbal rampage. Kuzi was the name of the feathered dragon. Dahlia backed against the wall, and her breath caught in her throat. Please, calm down. We're all in the same boat here. Dahlia put everything she had to appear non-threatening. Kuzi didn't stop and seemed to actively be getting angrier. The back of Mary Angela's head reflected translations next to the image of Dahlia's own trying not to appear terrified face. Trying not to be terrified of how angry she was face. She ignored the translations. Seriously, I'm not sure this is productive. Kuzi's rant escalated. She growled to herself and charged forward to press Dahlia up against the wall and screeched viscerally, not unlike a hawk. Enough! Enough! Dahlia shouted. Everyone was shocked, except Mary Angela, and Dahlia used the opportunity to shove herself free of Kuzi's temporarily relaxed grip. Now here's what we're gonna do. Yep! She bopped Kuzi on the beak. Are gonna stop this juvenile temper tantrum that you've subjected us to, and are instead gonna fly me up to the platform. Dahlia then pointed up and continued, Do you understand? The feathery dragon snuck a glance at the glassman for a definite translation. After Mary Angela did so, Kuzi set her jaw. and nodded at Dahlia before grabbing her by the ribs and launching to the underside of the platform. The guards had put the concrete slabs closer together than at the boys' cell to account for the winged dragon. Dahlia shifted her arms through the gap and scraped her shoulders after them with Kuzi's help pushing her through. However, just as she was about to pull the rest of her body up, the platform automatically closed a couple centimeters, trapping her. "Angela," she called. "Actually, I'm Sarah today," the glassman signed. "If you said something, I can't turn enough to see you. Can you get up here?" As Kuzi swooped down to bring Sarah up, Dahlia exhaled and used the added space to pull herself up to the hips. After the glassman was flown to the platform, she levitated each of her individual glass pieces through and stood on the shelf above Dahlia. Instead of then reaching down to help her friend up, Mary Angela or Sarah or whatever tilted her crystal head up toward the door while reflecting the face of a swamp dragon that Dahlia couldn't quite place. The door opened and the swamp dragon appeared in real life. It was, of course, Zell. "Oh, not you again," Dahlia hissed almost to herself. "You're welcome," Zell greeted as she completely misread the human's expression and didn't speak any Polish whatsoever. "Hi Zabish, hi Kuzi," the bog woman continued. The sea dragon responded with enthusiastic, "Hi Zell," while the mountain dragon gave a nervously polite smile and muttered, "We're doomed," under her breath. The glassman waved with the stiff puppet-like movement that she always had. Mike could have probably deduced that she was pleased that some sort of plan had come to fruition. Zell smiled. "Hey, I found this. Do you think it would be helpful?" Zell tossed down the hoverboard that the guards used to safely lower them to the ground. It bonked Dahlia on the head. "Hey, did you turn off the shockers that fire if someone tries to go up on this thing?" she asked, and then grabbed it without waiting for the glassman to translate for her. It shocked her. She instinctively let go and it floated out of her reach. But Sarah managed to catch it and disable the shocker before dropping it back on the human's head. Dahlia grabbed onto it and it revved a few times. So she twisted and turned a few times before she popped out of the concrete grip to the air so fast that the hover platform almost rammed her head first into the ceiling. Zell had found them a broken hover elevator. Luckily, the sensors stopped the momentum just in time. It sort of hurt Dahlia's neck though. She was lowered down slowly, but as she was still hanging under the platform, she ended up under where she needed to be, and had to climb her way up through the doorway. Zell was catching up with Kuzi and so didn't offer to help. Dahlia still didn't know what they were saying, which was that Zell was asking what Anton had been trying to tell her about the dam, but Kuzi didn't know. Dahlia tried pounding a few buttons to toss the board down to the glassman, but ended up shocking herself. Zell snatched it away for her while literally snapping at the other star searchers and correctly operated it without looking. When Sarah/Mary Angela arrived at the top, Dahlia helped her step off into the hallway. Kuzi called up, "Zell, that was 30 years ago. It doesn't matter who let the other one's parrot be freed to the wild where it can rightfully belong, or who was a whiny baby about it. Anyway, I'm not going to need you guys to go and open the platform so we can get out." "Why are you saying it like that? Were you assuming I wasn't going to save your lives or something?" Zell asked. "Just go already." Fine. Come on, humans." Zell left the platform hovering in the doorway and stormed out into the elaborately decorated blue hallway. "Are we gonna go find Ari and Mike and the rest of the dragons?" Dahlia asked as she stumbled to keep up with the surprisingly fast reptile. She turned halfway around as she continued to walk to get to Mary Angela's translation of what was going on. The glassy surface of her friend's head showed images of them pulling a lever to open a platform in which both the male and female prison cells, meeting up with Alani and the boys, and of the dam opening, allowing the water to crash toward the city. The faces of terrified sea folk looked toward the sky as an earth-shattering tidal wave dove toward them. Before she could show whether the city would be submerged, Sarah got distracted by the sound up ahead. The hallway opened out into a room covered in a myriad of technical junk, such as levers and flashing lights. Rafi and Tayo were in a couple of reclined dragon chairs with jugs of beer on the floor beside them. "Those levers control the cell platforms," Zell said loudly while pointing. Sarah translated. Raffi startled so hard that he fell off his chair. Tayo jumped forward and spread her bat wings to make herself look bigger and growled from deep in her chest. Dahlia instinctively jumped between the two parties. Whoa, calm down. We're all friends here, it's cool. No, we're not. Raffi and I are the ones who got you arrested, Tayo snapped in English. Dahlia gave her an exasperated and yet accusatory look. She'd make a great mom one day. She turned back to Zell. Give me a few minutes to talk to them before you attack. I think I can change their minds. No, you can't, Tayo called. Dahlia scrunched her eyes shut for a moment. Zell blinked at her with a complete lack of understanding of anything this crazy human lady was saying. The bog dragon's gaze steadily flitted from Dahlia to the forestmen, and the realization of what the humans must be saying dawned on her face. That's not gonna work, she muttered in swamp dialect. Despite this, she sat back on her heels, gestured for Dahlia to continue, and then crossed her arms. Raffi tried to slink around behind her. Dahlia tried to meet Sarah's eye to get a moment of strength before she went into her argument, but the glassmen just stared blankly back at her. Dahlia swallowed and turned back to the forestmen. Why are you doing this, guys? I thought you were supposed to help us. Not necessarily. Our orders were to bring you here. It's not our fault you fell in with a pack of terrorists. I will admit, we did not vet the Star Searchers before going to their meeting. However, we're here to figure out why we're here, and they are why we're here. So I think we're doing our job. Well, you should still have known better than to talk to criminals, present company included. Did you see what she did to Raph's antler? Dahlia set her jaw. Well, if you don't mind my saying so, that was poorly communicated, and I'm sorry. I am sorry that you're in this awkward position, and I'm sorry that you feel you need to follow orders while real people are getting hurt. Harper was separated from his dad because of a mistake. There wasn't a real crime. The swamp dragons made it a crime because they had no other choice but to provide a sacrifice. Ori, Mike, and I were almost executed without a trial for trying to understand who the good and bad guys are in this situation. Mary Angela would have been fine, but emotionally scarred. As everyone was distracted, Mary Angela or Sarah or whatever had snuck around the room and pulled the switches to the platforms in the cells. Raffi was the first one to notice, and everyone else slowly also came to that conclusion as well. Raffi looked to his fellow soldier to see what to do. The glassman had rescued him after Zell had tied him up, after all. Tayo didn't know what to do about this either. Everyone just froze for a moment. Please just let us save our friends, Dahlia whispered. We'll do our best to do the right thing. Why can't you two? Tayo and Raffi looked at each other. Raffi twisted the knob on a black box strapped to his shoulder, not unlike a walkie-talkie. It translated his speech to English. Tayo, I think that we should help, or at the very least, let them go. She shook her head, not convinced. They'll just breed chaos. I think Mary Angela was saying something about the dam breaking or being purposely open sometime soon, so there might be more chaos if you don't let us go, Dahlia noted. Mary Angela / Sarah gave a thumbs up. Raffi looked imploringly at Tayo. She sighed. You can go, she told Dahlia. But this never happened. Any consequences will be on you. Raffi lightly leaned his head on her shoulder as a sign of thanks and agreement. So you're not going to be helpful? Bummer, said Alani as she rushed into the room from the hallway. Do you have any of those platform hoverboard things? The guys are pretty swamped at the moment, she continued before anyone could get a word in lengthwise. Raffi pointed to where the hoverboards and the prisoner's contraband were. Ah, thanks. Alani? Dahlia asked, how are you? You were gone so long that we were all worried about you. Did you say the boys are in trouble? Can I help? No, the boys are fine. Alani put her hand on her friend's shoulder. There's something much bigger than that going on. I need you. And we're gonna need a portal. A big one.